All right, let's dive into this. You've brought some pretty fascinating stuff to the table about these software development models and how testing kind of fits into the whole picture.
Yeah, it's a pretty key part of building good software.
For sure. And we've got this overview that looks at Waterfall Agile and the V model approaches.
Yeah.
And our mission here is to really tease out the key differences between them, especially when it comes to when and how testing actually happens. You're looking to get up to speed on this quickly, but thoroughly.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure you walk away with some clear takeaways, so aha moments,
Yeah.
without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, sounds good.
So let's jump into these different ways of building software and see what really stands out.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. So from the start, it's really important to consider that each of these models kind of embodies a different set of assumptions about the software development process itself. And these assumptions, they really fundamentally influence when and how we think about ensuring quality through testing.
Right. Okay, so let's start with the waterfall model. This is often described as one of the oldest and most straightforward approaches. It's this linear sequential process, meaning each phase, like requirements, design implementation, verification, and maintenance has to be completely finished before you can even move on to the next one.
Right.
Think of it like a real waterfall. One step flows directly into the next, and going back up can be, well, pretty tricky.
Yeah, that's a great way to visualize it. The idea behind this sequential approach is that by thoroughly completing each phase before moving on, you minimize the potential for errors to kind of cascade down the line. There's a very strong emphasis on really comprehensive documentation and sign-off at each stage.
Gotcha. So this brings us to the really interesting part when we start talking about testing in the waterfall model, right?
Right.
From what I'm looking at here, all the testing, unit testing, integration testing,
Yeah.
testing, acceptance testing. It seems like it all happens after the entire implementation phase is
Yeah,
finished.
that's right.
Okay, so let me get this straight. So if you find a major flaw way late in the testing phase, going back and making significant changes could cause considerable delays.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like building an entire house before checking if the foundation is even solid.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
What are your initial thoughts on this sequential approach to development and this sort of like late stage testing?
It definitely raises this important question about the inherent risk in this model.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, the waterfall model really banks on the initial requirements being absolutely rock solid
Okay.
and not changing much throughout the entire project lifecycle.
Gotcha.
And delaying testing until the very end means that any flaws or misunderstandings that are kind of baked into those early stages, they might not even surface until it's very expensive and very time-consuming to fix them.
Ouch.
Imagine spending months and months building something, only to discover it doesn't actually solve the problem that it was intended to solve.
Oh, man.
Mm.
Yeah, that sounds pretty painful. Okay, so let's shift gears now
Okay.
and take a look at the Agile model.
Okay, sure.
This approach is presented as being very iterative, incremental,
Yeah.
and adaptive. So instead of this one long sequence, Agile breaks the development process down into these short cycles called sprints,
Right.
typically lasting just 1 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, that's right.
And at the end of each sprint, you've got a working piece of the product.
That's the goal.
The material you shared really emphasizes this constant communication between the developers, the stakeholders, and the testers.
Yeah, and I think that's really key to understanding Agile. The idea is to embrace change and acknowledge that requirements can and often do evolve as a project progresses. So having those short iterations allows for frequent feedback and course correction, making it much more likely that the final product will actually meet the real needs.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how does testing fit into this Agile world? It seems like it's quite different from the waterfall method.
Yeah, it's a significant departure.
Okay.
So in Agile, testing is not an afterthought. It's integrated directly into the process, and it happens continuously throughout each sprint.
So it's happening alongside development.
Yes, alongside development, we're talking unit testing, integration testing, functional testing, regression testing, all happening continuously.
Gotcha. So the idea is to test early and often.
Exactly. The earlier you find defects, the cheaper they are to fix. And this continuous testing also helps to ensure that the development stays aligned with what the user actually needs and wants.
So you're constantly validating and getting feedback.
Exactly, a continuous feedback loop.
That's pretty cool. So it sounds like a much more flexible and responsive way to build software.
Yeah.
What stands out to you the most about this integrated approach compared to the waterfall method?
Well, I think one of the most significant advantages is the reduction in the cost of fixing defects,
Okay.
because testing is happening constantly. If a bug is introduced, it's likely to be caught very soon after the code is written, while the developers still have that code fresh in their minds.
Got it.
So it makes it much easier and cheaper to fix.
Okay, that makes sense. So kind of like if we go back to our house analogy, it's like inspecting the electrical wiring as soon as it's installed,
Exactly.
rather than waiting until the entire house is built and then discovering a major wiring issue.
Exactly, right. And you don't want to be ripping out walls to fix wiring.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
All right. So we've covered waterfall and agile. Now let's move on to the V model.
Right?
Now, this one is described as sort of an extension of the waterfall model, but with a crucial difference. It emphasizes testing in parallel with the development phases.
Right. And what's particularly interesting is how it tries to bring a much stronger focus on quality assurance right from the beginning,
Okay.
while still maintaining those structured phases of the waterfall approach.
Gotcha.
It explicitly links each development phase with a corresponding testing activity.
So as the process moves down the V, through requirements and design, you've got these corresponding testing activities moving up the other side, from unit testing to user acceptance testing.
Right. It's all about planning and preparing for testing in parallel with the development work.
Okay. So while the team is busy creating the system design, they're also thinking about how they're going to test that system's functionality.
Exactly.
And for every development stage, there's a corresponding testing activity.
Right. So you've got unit testing for coding, integration testing for when you're putting different parts of the system together,
Okay.
system testing, and finally, user acceptance testing.
So the benefit here seems to be that by doing all this testing alongside the development, you're greatly reducing the chances of those defects just going undetected.
Absolutely. That's the whole point.
Okay. And clear requirements are seen as the foundation for doing really effective testing.
Right. If you don't know what you're building, it's hard to know if you built it right.
Uh-huh. Makes sense. So the V model is really all about delivering high-quality software.
Exactly. Quality is baked into the process.
Okay. This seems like a much more structured way to incorporate early testing compared to that initial waterfall approach.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this parallel structure?
Well, if we take a step back and look at the V model, it almost feels like an attempt to bring some of the benefits of early testing into a more traditional phase-based approach
Okay.
by specifically mapping out the testing activities to each development phase. It really encourages a more proactive approach to quality.
Gotcha.
You're thinking about how you're going to verify and validate the work at each stage, rather than just building and then testing at the end.
That makes sense.
It aims to ensure that the final product meets those defined requirements and user expectations through really rigorous testing at each level.
So to really solidify the differences for you, let's do a direct comparison of how testing is handled in each model.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So with waterfall testing is a very distinct phase that comes after development.
Yeah.
Which can make it really difficult to adapt if requirements change.
Right.
On the other hand, Agile integrates testing continuously, allowing for that early defect detection and much greater adaptability.
Right. It's all about being flexible and responsive.
And then you have the V model, which meticulously plans testing alongside each development stage, really aiming for high quality at each level within a more structured process.
Right. It's about building in quality from the very beginning.
Okay. So it sounds like the choice of which model to use really comes down to the specific needs of the project, the timeline, and how much risk a team is willing to tolerate.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all answer here. Each model has its own set of trade-offs and will be better suited to certain types of projects.
Right. Okay. Can you give me an example?
Sure. So if you have very clearly defined requirements that are unlikely to change,
Yeah.
and a high degree of confidence in those requirements, waterfall might still be a viable option.
Okay.
But for projects where the requirements are more fluid, or where getting that early feedback is crucial,
Right.
Agile offers some significant advantages.
Gotcha.
And then the V model can be a good fit for projects where a structured approach and thorough testing at each stage are really important.
Okay.
Perhaps in safety critical systems or something like that.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. The visual comparison you provided really highlights these differences, with waterfall showing testing as this separate stage at the end,
Yeah.
while Agile and V model demonstrate much more continuous or parallel testing throughout the development lifecycle.
Exactly. It's about choosing the right tool for the job.
So for someone who's trying to wrap their head around all of this,
Yeah.
what would you say are the key takeaways?
I think the most important thing to understand is that when testing happens in the software development lifecycle has a profound impact on the outcome.
Okay.
Delaying testing, like in the waterfall model, carries the risk of discovering costly defects very late in the process, and it reduces flexibility.
Gotcha.
But integrating testing early and often, like in Agile and the V model, allows for much quicker feedback, easier fixes, and a much greater likelihood of actually delivering a product that truly meets the user's needs.
Right. It's about catching those problems early before they snowball into something bigger.
Exactly.
Okay, so to summarize our deep dive today, we've really looked at three distinct approaches to building software. And most importantly, how testing is integrated into each. The waterfall model, with its end-of-the-line testing, Agile, with its continuous iterative testing, and the V model, which structures development with parallel testing activities.
Right. And each one represents a different philosophy on how to manage complexity and ensure quality in software development.
And in the real world, do teams typically stick to just one model, or do they ever blend them?
It's pretty common to see teams blending elements of these models to create hybrid approaches.
Interesting.
It's all about finding what works best for their specific context and needs.
Makes sense.
But the underlying principles of early and continuous testing are increasingly recognized as best practices across the entire software development landscape.
So here's something interesting to think about. Could the ideas behind these different testing strategies be applied to other areas beyond just software development?
That's an interesting question.
Like, what if you're learning a new skill? Would a waterfall approach, where you try to learn all the theory before you even try to do it, be less effective than an agile approach?
I think it's certainly worth considering. The whole idea of getting early feedback and adapting your approach based on that feedback is a powerful concept that could extend far beyond software.
That's a really great point. Thanks for bringing these insightful sources to the table. This has been a really fascinating conversation.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure.